This is the Beast by Tekkusai, an extremely speed-focused glass pad designed by the mind behind GLSSWRKS and mel0n. This pad is truly the most unique glass pad I've ever tested, and after months of testing the Beast prototype, I can finally tell you all about this pad's beastly performance. Now, the Beast has had a rather interesting development cycle, as it was initially supposed to be a future GLSSWRKS release, but the pad didn't fit the archetype of a GLSSWRKS pad since it was so speed optimized. So the pad was scrapped in favor of designs like the upcoming GLSSWRKS Hana. But Tekkusai saw a unique opportunity with this scrapped pad and decided to release it separately from GLSSWRKS as a special experimental project, so to speak. So today I'm very excited to tell you all about the Beast and what makes this pad so special. But before we get into it, a big thank you to Tekkusai for sending over the final retail version of the Beast for review as well as the prototype. And as always, this video will be fully subtitled and timestamps will be available down in the video description. And if you enjoy my review of the Beast and want to see more videos like this, including a review of the upcoming GLSSWRKS Hana, be sure to leave a like on this video and get subscribed. In terms of testing time, I only tested the retail version of the Beast for a couple days as I was part of the testing and prototyping group for the Beast, and I've been using the prototype version of this pad on and off for several months now, and since the retail Beast and the prototype Beast are quite similar, I didn't need to put too much additional testing time onto this pad for its review. Over my time testing the prototype and of course the retail Beast, I've used a wide variety of skates on this pad, including the X-Ray Pad Air Series skates as well as the TGX plastics, but since the retail Beast comes with a set of the Unusual Way Esports Silver Fox skates, I wrapped up my testing using those skates as most people who get the Beast are going to use these included skates. Alright, now in terms of in-game performance, the Beast is by far the most unique and the fastest glass pad I've personally tested. The closest analog I can compare the Beast to is the GLSSWRKS Kazemi, but instead of the pad having a balanced performance profile, the Beast performance has been tweaked to be completely speed focused. Another way of describing how the Beast feels to use is that it's the closest to an air hockey like glide I've ever felt on a glass pad, or any pad for that matter. Because of this, the Beast is best suited for more dynamic tracking focused aiming, however the pad is very bad for static flicking aiming as the pad itself, due to its air hockey like glide, has little to no significant friction, therefore accuracy dependent aiming is less than ideal here on the Beast. And due to the frictionless surface, the performance on the Beast here will be almost entirely dependent on what skates you use, as different skate shapes and materials will alter the pad's friction coefficients, making the pad better suited for some aim types and worse suited for others. Using the included Silver Fox skates, the pad felt slightly more balanced with slightly more control and ever so slightly less speed, but even then, the Beast is still extremely fast. You can use other skate types to further alter the feeling of the Beast, but I'll talk more about that later on in this video. Another unique aspect of the Beast is its surfacing. We've seen some very unique surfacings pop up this year, the most notable being the surfacing on the lock-on Harut. However, the Beast is using a surfacing I've never seen before. It's similar in theory to the Harut, but it's a very random design, which is why the pad has such a unique performance profile. This unique surfacing also gives the Beast some incredibly unique features, such as being the most skin-friendly surface I've used, as well as being the first sensor-optimized glass pad surface that is fully compatible with the Pixar 3950 line of sensors. There are also some other unique features and some downsides to the surface, but I'll talk more in depth about those later. Now I will say, the Beast isn't a beginner-friendly pad like the Kazemi or the Harut were, nor is it a general use-friendly pad, as it's more of a fringe, hyper-niche speed pad in my eyes, made for people who want speed and only speed. To effectively use this pad, even for general use and not even gaming, you need god-tier mouse control to tame the Beast, so this pad is not going to be a beginner-friendly pad in any way, shape, or form. This is a pad made for people who love speed and want only speed, so keep that in mind if you're considering the Beast, as this is not going to perform like a normal glass pad will. In terms of pricing and sizing, the Beast retails for a rather high 166 Canadian dollars or 120 USD. However, due to the highly experimental nature of this pad, it is limited to 1,500 units worldwide, so availability of the Beast is going to be very limited. Now, the price is definitely a little higher than a lot of other glass pads we've seen, but due to the experimental nature of the pad, it kind of justifies the price. Again, I think it's a little outside of what a lot of people are going to be comfortable with spending on a pad, but given its highly niche experimental nature, I understand why it's priced this way. In terms of sizing, the Beast comes in only one size, a 500 by 450 by 2.5mm version. I'm very glad to see the Beast comes in such a large size, as due to the speed optimized performance, people will likely use higher centimeter per 360 ranges here on this pad, pad to counteract the pad's speed to get some semblance of control, and the larger dimensions of this pad allows the beast to be compatible with most, if not all, higher centimeter per 360 ranges. Over my testing, I tested a bunch of centimeter per 360 ranges, anywhere from 40 to 90 centimeter per 360, and even on 90 cm I didn't have any issues with my mouse going off the side of the pad, which was great to see. In terms of unboxing, the beast comes in a new magnetic packaging, similar in style to the magnetic packaging we saw for the Wallhack SP004. Inside the packaging, the pad is surrounded by the same aerated foam we saw included with the Kazemi's packaging, but the foam's outer layer has been covered with a velvet-like fabric here on the beast. This is a nice attention to detail to make the unboxing experience feel a little more premium, and there's more than enough foam here to protect the beast during shipping. Under the foam, we're greeted by a little welcome card from Tekkusai, and as I mentioned earlier, we have a full set of the Unusual Way Sports Silver Fox skates included. The retail version of the beast will also include a cleaning cloth, but since my pad is a review unit, it didn't come with one. Before we move on, I wanted to quickly talk a little bit more about these included skates next. The Silver Fox skates are essentially an X-Ray Pad Jade Air skate, just with a different curvature to them. They also have the same added layer of SMPF foam that we saw in the X-Ray Pad Air series skates, so they're very quiet on glass. However, due to their material makeup, they have some shortcomings here on the beast. The curvature of the Silver Fox's skates, as I mentioned earlier, is also a little unique, being more akin to the shaping of the Meteorite skates, being more spherical instead of the traditional cylindrical shaping we often see on dot skates. This means that the Silver Fox skates' contact areas will initially be smaller on glass than what you'd see at an X-Ray Pad dot skate, but they will wear down to have a larger or similar contact area over time to the X-Ray Pad dots, making them more controlled. Now, because of the unique shaping here, the Silver Fox skates feel like a middle ground between the Jade and the Obsidian skates, as they're slower than the Jade dots but faster than the Obsidians. Now, I actually do quite like the Silver Fox skates, but I don't think they belong on a glass pad. Since they're made of 100% PTFE, they will wear very quickly on glass, especially here on the beast, as this unique surfacing chews up skates faster than any other glass pad I've tested. So while the skates perform well, they have a very short lifespan here on the beast. I would have much rather seen hardened PTFE skates or UHMWPE skates included here with the beast, as they'll have a significantly longer lifespan here on the beast's very abrasive surface. Alright, next up let's talk about the pad itself. First, let's talk about the beast design and print quality. Now, personally speaking, I love the design here on the beast. As someone who's not the biggest fan of the more character-focused designs we've seen dominate the market, like the designs we've seen on the GLSSWRKS pads, so I'm very happy to see such a unique design here on the beast. Now, the pad's print quality is also fantastic. The quality is similar to the print quality we saw on the Kazemi, but since the beast's glass is only 2mm thick, the artwork is much clearer here, as there isn't that blurriness or milkiness distortion caused by the thicker glass. The beast is without a doubt in my mind the most visually clear glass pad I've ever tested, and compared to the Kazemi and the Lock-On Harut, you can plainly see just how clear the beast looks visually compared to the competition. Now, in regards to build quality and QC, across the board the beast is very well manufactured, as we come to expect from any pad from Tekkusai. The beast's unique surfacing is perfectly implemented and there are no raised spots or dead zones on the surfacing. The edges of the pad are also very well implemented, and the base, being the same base we saw on the Kazemi, does perform very well. The reason why I'm so impressed with the overall quality and QC here on the beast is that it was not manufactured in the same factory that made the Akari and the Kazemi. This pad was manufactured in a brand new factory, and according to Tekkusai, this is their first glass pad they've ever developed. So seeing the same level of quality here on the beast as we've seen on Tekkusai's other glass pads is very impressive. I also wanted to mention that despite the pad's 2.5mm thickness, 2mm of which is the glass itself, the pad is extremely durable. I accidentally dropped an Elgato Keylay on the pad from about 6 feet up, and the pad survived totally unscathed, which is really impressive. So I wouldn't be concerned about any durability issues here on the pad, as it's actually very durable for being so thin. Alrighty, let's talk about the beast's unique surfacing next. As I mentioned earlier, this pad is using a brand new surfacing I've never seen before on any glass pad, and this new surfacing has a lot of unique features you won't find on any other glass pad on the market. Now, according to the beast product page, the surface is described as being a heat-treated surface that features a newly developed ionized surface coating. Its glide property is described as being a smooth glide. The beast surface is also advertised as being very skin-friendly and is also optimized for modern sensors like the Pixar 3950 series of sensors, as I mentioned earlier. Now, to the hand, the beast surface feels similar to the Kazemi surfacing. However, the beast surfacing is slightly rougher and has more friction to the hand. Looking closer at the beast surface, we can see what makes the beast so unique as its surfacing is unlike anything I've ever seen before. While the IKEA Glass and Lock-On Harut had semi-similar wavy randomized surfaces, the Beast surface is, for lack of a better word, pure chaos. The only thing I can really compare the surfacing to would be the surface stitching we saw in the Lethal Gaming Gear Neptune, just shrunk down and significantly more randomized. Since the Beast is manufactured in a brand new factory, I had a feeling we'd see a very unique surface, but I had no idea the surface would look like this. Now, of course, this unique surfacing is what gives the Beast its very unique performance profile and air hockey-like glide that I talked about earlier. Now, in regards to the skin friendliness of the Beast surface, the Beast is one of the most skin-friendly surfaces I've tested, on a similar level to the IKEA Glass and Lock-On Harut in my opinion. However, the pad still does get sticky if your hands are very sweaty or moist, so from my experience, while I could use the Beast without an arm sleeve, most of the time once my wrist and hands got sweaty, the pad did get stickier, so I opted to wear an arm sleeve during most of my testing, as I do for pretty much all glass pads. But for most hands, the pad will be usable without an arm sleeve, but of course this will vary from person to person. And as I mentioned earlier, the Beast surface is the first glass pad surface that I know of course, whose surface is fully compatible and optimized for modern sensors like the Pixar 3950 series. Over my testing with both the prototype and the retail Beast, I used both 3950 and 3395 sensors, and both sensors perform perfectly fine without any skipping issues, even on 0.7 and 2mm LODs and on all the high polling rates, which is fantastic to see. However, while the Beast surface does have a lot of advantages, it does have one crucial downside, as I mentioned earlier, as this surface absolutely shreds mel skates, specifically 100% PTFE skates, like the included Silver Fox skates. This is why, as I mentioned earlier, I wish the Beast came with hardened PTFE skates like the Obsidian Airs, or UHMWPE skates like the Obsidian Air Pro Series skates, as they'd be significantly more resistant to wear and thus will have a longer lifespan at the cost of less speed, of course, than the included Silver Fox skates. Now, to be clear, the included Silver Fox skates are totally usable here on the Beast and they actually do perform very well, but keep in mind the lifespan of the skates will be significantly shorter here on the Beast than it would be if you used the Silver Fox skates on another glass pad or a fabric pad. Speaking of skates, let's talk about the Beast skate compatibility next. As I mentioned earlier, I've tested a wide variety of skates here on the Beast prototype and the retail version, and for the most part the pad skate compatibility is good, with the exception of 100% PTFE skates like the included skates as I mentioned earlier. Personally speaking, I found the Beast to be the most usable when I was using the Obsidian Air Pro Dots and Donut skates, as they're the most durable and controlled skate you can get for glass, but even with these highly controlled skates, the Beast was still insanely fast, far too fast for me to reliably use. In terms of skate shapes, full size, speed stocks, donuts, and dots were all usable here on the Beast, but skate material, aside from 100% PTFE skates like I talked about earlier, hardened PTFE, UHMWPE skates are all compatible here with the Beast. It's also worth mentioning that plastic skates like the TGX Plastics and Exact skates are also usable here on the Beast, but they have the highest level of audio feedback out of all the skates I tested. And speaking of audio feedback, just like we saw in the Lock-On Harut, these more wavy, randomized surfaces have a higher level of audio feedback than the more fine grit sandpaper-like surfaces do, and since the Beast uses a similar surfacing to the Harut, just way more randomized, the pad isn't the quietest, but it's also not the loudest. As I mentioned earlier, from my testing, skates like the Exacts and Plastics were the loudest. The non-Air Obsidians and Obsidian Pros were also quite loud too, but skates like the X-Ray Pad Air series skates such as the Air Jades, Air Obsidians, and Air Obsidian Pros, and the included Silver Fox skates were the quietest, as they have that added layer of SMPF foam, so the skates are pretty silent here on the pad. So because of this, I would recommend sticking with skates that have that added SMPF layer. You can use skates that don't have it, but it will come at the cost of a higher audio feedback here on the Beast, so I'd stick with those skates just to ensure you have a quiet, non-scratchy experience. And in terms of the effects of dust here on the Beast, since the surfacing is so randomized and there aren't any thicker ridges where dust can sit on like there were on the Harut surfacing, the pad is mostly immune to dust, and during my testing of both the prototype and the retail versions, I never had any issues with dust. Pad hair was occasionally an issue, as it is on all glass pads, but as long as I wiped off the Beast before I used it, I was able to avoid any significant issues. But while the Beast is largely immune to dust and other debris, I would still recommend keeping the included cleaning cloth handy or a microfiber cloth just to clean the pad off before and after use to prevent any potential issues, as I recommend for all glass pads. Another great feature here on the Beast is the edges. Commonly, glass pads have sharper edges that have a slight roundness to them, like the edges we saw on the Kazemi, but the edges edges here on the beast are beveled. Admittedly, the beveling is very slight, but at least it does make the edges here on the beast more rounded than other glass pad edges were. And since the glass here on the beast is only 2 millimeters thick, the edges of the pad are much less noticeable than the edges on other thicker glass pads are. So the thinness of the edges combined with the slight beveling makes the edges of the beast almost unnoticeable, and it's very easy to move your arm up and down and along the sides of the pad without adding any significant friction to your movements. And just like the lock-on Harut, the edges of the beast are textured so they're not glossy and sticky to the skin, which is a great attention to detail. And lastly, I wanted to quickly talk about the beast base. The base here is the same design to the one we saw in the GLSSWRKS Kazemi, being a hexagonal silicone base. Now the base itself isn't particularly sticky to the hand, so it does rely on force to actually anchor itself to the desk. Now on the Kazemi, the base worked really well because the Kazemi was a thicker and a heavier pad, but the beast being a much thinner and much lighter pad doesn't anchor itself as strongly as the base did on the Kazemi, but it does anchor the pad well enough where it doesn't move or shift during use. This is mainly because the pad is so thin, so it's difficult to actually get stuck on the edges of the pad to cause it to move, but regardless of the thinness of the pad, the base does anchor the beast quite well, and over my testing I had no issues with the base moving or shifting, which is great to see. Alright, well in closing, overall the beast is a very interesting pad, definitely the most unique glass pad I've tried this year, but it's also the most niche. Personally speaking, the performance of the beast isn't for me as it's way too fast for me to control and aim on, but I can see people who love speed pads and just want speed and only speed on their pads loving the beast. Just keep in mind, if you do get this pad, you are going to need some god tier mouse control to tame the beast, so to speak. I will say though, I do love this idea of Tekkusai selling more experimental pads, and I hope we'll see more releases in the future. As while the beast isn't for me, I'm sure GLSSWRKS has scrapped multiple more control focused glass pads, so hopefully we'll see some more experimental releases in the future. But while the beast wasn't really for me, I will say though that this pad has made me even more excited for the upcoming GLSSWRKS Hana, as the Hana will share a lot of similarities to the beast, just with a more balanced performance profile, of course, similar to the other GLSSWRKS pads we've seen. So while the beast wasn't for me, I'm much more excited for the Hana now that I've tried this pad. But if you'd like to learn more about the beast and pick one up for yourself, I will have product pages down in the video description for you to check out. But that's going to be everything for today's episode of the mel0n review. Thank you very much to Tekkusai for including me in the prototype and development stages here for the beast, as well as sending over the final retail version. I greatly appreciate it. Big thank you to our channel members Yuki89, Prince, It Was Luck, Lunaris, and Mark World. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to become a member here and support what I'm doing here on the channel with the in-depth product reviews and the teardown project, you can become a member here for only $2 a month. It's one of the best ways to directly support the channel, so thank you very much in advance for your support. You can also help support the channel by using code mel0n with a 0 over at Lethal Gaming Gear, Potent Gaming Gear, TJ Exclusives, Met Keys, and a couple other retailers to save yourself some money off your orders and help support the channel. Thanks again for watching my review of the Tekkusai Beast, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the mel0n review. Peace.